We are in the thick of a federal election campaign, and we want to hear from all of the Lethbridge candidates. Today, joining me in studio is Stephnie Watson, the federal Green Party candidate for the Lethbridge riding. Steph, welcome to BCN.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So why don't you explain to our viewers a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so my name's Stephnie Watson. I have no A in Stephnie, which throws some people off. And it's great, though. It's a little bit of uniqueness. And my pronouns are they, them, and I just like to get that out there to make sure that people don't make the mistake of misgendering, which can happen, but hey, we're all learning, right?
Mm-hmm. So when you're not out door knocking, what do you do for a living? To help pay the bills?
To help pay the bills.
Right?
That's a good question. I actually have been starting up the development of my new company, Sherlock & Watson Scientific, for the last year and a half, which has really helped me to better understand the small business world and some of the issues around business and stakeholders and legal legislation and items. So that's been great. I mean, I grew up in a family that had a lot of their own trade, small businesses and stuff, so I learned a lot from that as well, but it's different when it's hands-on.
And you spent a lot of time in central Alberta in Red Deer?
Yeah, so I grew up in Red Deer, and then I moved down here about 17 years ago to start my bachelor's in environmental science, and then I've been here ever since with a couple of jogs out to Red Deer again and Saskatoon, and but always coming back here. So it's become my home.
Why make the jump into politics? To some people, it's not a very popular move.
I got to the point where I was finding the representation and the voices just weren't reflecting some of the messaging that I felt and conversations that need to be happening in our country at the federal level, and the responsibility to other candidates and making sure that we actually have these discussions instead of just the taglines, right? Like we need to be having the real discussions during election time, but also around and in between elections.
So climate action, climate change is a big issue, obviously, with the federal election coming up. What is the Green Party's plan to tackle climate change?
Yeah, so my background being environmental science, I actually have a background in climate change. I worked for Environment Canada doing some precipitation analysis, and some of my studies were in climate. And it's a scary thing out there. The new IPCC report just came out. The United Nations are meeting right now in the States. Canada is missing in those talks because we're in an election. And the leaders decided, even though Elizabeth May asked if we could take a break to go and attend this important meeting, none of the other leaders would agree to it. So unfortunately, Canada is not being properly represented down there right now. We're in a climate crisis. We have about 15 months left to be able to start getting the government plans and actions in place to meet our targets to keep us at the 1.5 degrees Celsius that the globe needs to be at.
So sorry, what happens after 15 months?
Well, after 15 months, then we go into faster changes that cost more, ones that don't necessarily allow us to bring everyone forward. We want everyone to be able to move into a green economics transition. We don't want to leave anyone behind. And so it's really important that we get this going, and it's a nonpartisan issue. This needs to be on the forefront of every party. It needs to be on the forefront of every Canadian, every person living here, as well as globally. So
Steph, what do you say to people that believe in climate change, but they say it's more Mother Nature, it's more cyclical, it's not man-made? So what do you say to those people? How do you respond to that? Because a lot of people out there believe that, right?
Unfortunately, yes, and it goes back to this: science is not a belief. Science is a process. We have measures, balances. There's so many different projects that have been out there, research projects, money spent on this, expertise developed in this. And we have the ability to make these changes. And we have the ability of doing that without leaving anyone behind. So the question becomes, why are we afraid for this change? The change won't harm us. But if we don't do anything, that change will. Because we will be having a change. It's just whether we're going to have a proactive change or if we're going to have a reactive. And the reactive is when we're dealing with fallouts from natural disasters, displacement of people, including within Canada, but from outside of Canada as well. There's just all these different issues that pull into this. And it increases poverty rates. It causes issues with our companies and employees because all of a sudden their businesses might not be there or able to sustain them, or employees can't get in to deal with it because of health issues from this or from their houses burning down, so they have to go deal with that. Like there's just all these different situations that build into this.
So the Green Party believes in a lot of green technology. So how will you help people transition into that field?
Yeah, so green technology is still part of our energy sector. We have all these transferable skill sets from all of our workers who are in oil, gas, and mining that we can move into other sectors very easily with small training programs. And we want the workers to know that we're there to support them and help them with this transition. So the energy sector in regards to renewable energies and green technologies is one of the fastest growing ones with long-term sustainable jobs that are also more localized. So then those workers can actually stay in their areas and more at home than having to travel and be away from their families for long periods of time. So it's a different way of doing business. It's not necessarily a bad way of doing business. Many of the oil and gas and mining companies have actually invested in these other technologies as well, right? So we're just looking at moving stuff over. It's a transition. A lot of jobs and sectors transition over time, and oil and gas and mining is one of the ones that it's time to start moving over.
So do you believe the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion will actually be built? Will the shovels go into the ground? The federal government bought it for $4.5 billion, but it seems like death to delay. You know, do you think it'll actually be built?
I hope not. I don't think it's the best option that we have available to us right now.
Do you believe more rail, transporting oil by rail or by ship? Or
Ships are also difficult. Rail is as well. We do have quite an extensive pipeline system within Canada already that people
right?
forget about.
Yeah, we have tens of thousands of pipes already.
So why aren't we retrofitting those, and why aren't we going back and remediating those and like expanding those ones instead of putting in new ones in new areas that can affect other economies, other people's livelihoods, other natural areas? Canada is one of the few countries that still has a lot of our natural area that helps sustain the natural ecosystems needed. So why are we willing to put those at risk for short-term gain?
How about when it comes to solar and maybe wind farms, the wind turbines? You know, some farmers I've spoken to that have the wind turbines on their land say, we're killing a lot of the birds. The birds are hitting the blades and dying at a fast pace. So we have to protect these migratory birds. Mm-hmm. So what's the solution there?
So there are lots of studies being conducted right now. I can't speak to them directly as I have not been involved with them directly, but it's also bats. Bats are also very susceptible to windmills. So there's lots of research and new innovations coming. The problem is that they're not subsidized, they're not supported like the oil and gas companies and mining companies are. So until we transition that over and make it more of a level playing field, we're not going to see those new methodologies and those new technologies coming in. So one of the things when some of the original wind farms were first built is an analysis of migratory pathways of birds was not taken into account. That is now taken into account, right? So dealing with the silence echo, where our bats, they do the
sonar. They
sonar,
bounce off of an object so they know the distance.
Yeah, they know the distance. They can't do that with the windmills the way they're designed. So it's altering those designs slightly so that we can deal with that. But that all requires research and funding in science. And when you've had the funding of science cut and the access to that cut, that reduces our innovation to be able to deal with those problems. But these are easily solvable problems.
One of the promises with the Green Party as well, Steph, is to provide universal pharmacare, including dental care for Canadians. How is that going to be funded? That's huge money.
It is huge money, but something else that's huge money is people missing work and not being able to work due to healthcare, not being able to continue their education or to be able to look for other work because they can't afford their medications, because they're living a less than healthy lifestyle because they're not able to meet their minimum requirements. So by having a PHARMACARE plan in place, it allows people to be at their healthiest so that they can participate in our society to their fullest.
So how would we pay for that? Taxes going up? Because I know that the Green Party was talking about increased corporate taxes, 15 to 21 points, maybe place a special tax on bank profits. Would you incorporate that somehow or use some of that money to pay for it?
Some of it, but also I believe, if I remember correctly, And please double check in our platform as well, because I don't have the best recall, is we're actually looking at designating a certain percentage of the GDP of Canada to paying for that kind of stuff. So that's important as well. We're like actually looking at legislatively requiring that a certain percentage of money goes directly to that for that purpose.
What about education? Let's talk about that.
Same with the education.
Yeah, education,
Yeah. Post-secondary
post-secondary education. What's the Green Party plan
education.
for students?
For students, it's two-tiered. So we want post-secondary to be free and accessible in college and university, yeah. And that's part of that transitioning to a green economy, where we have to have a lot of people retrained and stuff. We need to make it accessible. We also need to, it deals with also shortages of healthcare professionals and doctors, right? Finances are a huge barrier. The cost of university is a huge barrier. We have a lot of qualified people and immigrants coming in as well who can fill these positions that need to be filled, but they can't afford to be doing it. So we need to remove that barrier so our society can move forward.
Unfortunately, I know in this lifetime, after raising 2 children as well, nothing is free.
No.
The money has to come from somewhere.
Yep.
So who would pay for the books? Who would pay for all that education? I know when my son was in college, he had to pay $250 for one book.
Yeah.
You know?
So who's paying for it now is our question as well, right?
Well, the students are, right?
Students are.
Student loans.
Their student loans, right? Yeah. And then a lot of those student loans aren't being paid back. They're being forgiven. We have all these bursaries. We have all these grant applications, different types of programs where we can refunnel that money into just the costs of the education instead, right? So it's using the money that's already there as well as taking that money from other locations, such as increasing corporate taxes. Because one of the things I've learned being in business is that you never actually pay that 15 to 21% in taxes because of all the deductions you get. So by increasing that percentage, we're able to bring in some of that money to help pay for this stuff so that employers will get better qualified people, that they're not having to send their employees at their dollar to the school. They can just go get upgraded.
We have an opioid crisis, not just here in Lethbridge, Alberta, around the world it seems like, especially here in North America.
Yeah.
What is the Green Party's plan to deal with the opioid crisis in Canada?
Yeah, it's full action on that. We want to decriminalize drugs.
Decriminalize?
Decriminalize.
So heroin,
cocaine,
opioids, all of it?
All of it.
Fentanyl?
Decriminalize, yep.
Oh, wow.
I mean, fentanyl's used in hospitals as well, right? And decriminalize it so the focus can be actually put towards like the people who are doing it illegally, like smuggling it in illegally, selling it, making it illegally, right? Mm-hmm. That's where the focus needs to go. Right now, the focus is on the users, and that doesn't help at all. And then—
But wouldn't decriminalizing cause the rates to go through the roof if all of a sudden it's cool to shoot up with heroin?
No.
Or use cocaine or meth or fentanyl? Don't you think some of those
Not if
people
we—
would experiment like, hey, this is cool now?
People experiment anyways. People are prescribed these by doctors, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the addiction starting, is by prescribed drugs. And then once they can no longer get them, but they've already become addicted to them, that's when they turn to the illegal ones. Decriminalizing that allows them to go get the help that they need once we get the supports in place for harm reduction, for intox and detox centers, for recovery programs, counseling. Like we need like about 5 to 7 different types of programs in place to help the people with addictions. Making them criminals is not one of them.
What's the Green Party's plan for reconciliation and bridging that gap with our Indigenous community?
That's very important to the Green Party. The Indigenous community has so much to offer, and we need to really reconcile with our past and acknowledge and meet all the targets under the Truth and Reconciliation document, as well as the international ones. I think it's great that Lethbridge has really been leading away with that. We just recently adopted Oki as our official greeting here in Lethbridge. Welcome.
In Blackfoot, yes.
In Blackfoot, right? The traditional knowledge is amazing and needs to be more accepted into our society. We need to making sure that they're at the table, having their voices properly heard. so that we can remove these barriers and stigmas that are in place in our society, because we have so much wonderful, talented, and innovative people, and they have so much experience and knowledge.
Stephnie Watson, Green Party candidate for Lethbridge riding. Thanks for joining me in studio today.
Thank you.